welcome back to another episode of Peace Evangelical Lutheran Church's Sermon Podcast. Today, we are joined by Spiritual Director, Dr. Tate, who guides us through reflection on Genesis chapter 21, verses 8 through 21. This complicated story contains deep truths about our roles in life and our relationships with God. Listen until the end for your weekly dose of spiritual inspiration, and as always, thank you for liking and following this show. It really helps.
My name is Lori. You don't have to call me Miss Lori, but you can. And you don't call me Dr. Lori, only my son does that. So when we're little kids, we teach kids very concrete, black and white, hot, cold, good, bad. But we all know that we don't stay at that level. We learn and grow, and we realize that, the stove's not always hot. Sometimes it's okay to touch the stove. And things that were always black and white, right and wrong, become blurred. And when I say blurred, they become to a place where we need to discern. And I always come back to a foundational person in the Lutheran Church of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. There is no way in the world I can get my mind around the concept that it's okay to hurt somebody, to murder somebody. And yet here Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a godly man, came to this understanding with Hitler. We discern, and God's Spirit helps us. So today I am going to talk about good and bad. A psychologist, Dr. Gerald May, says this: I confess I'm no longer very good at telling the difference between good things and bad things. Of course, there are many events in human history that can only be labeled as evil. But from the standpoint of inner individual experience, the distinction has become blurred for me. Some things start out looking great, but wind up terribly, while other things seem bad at the beginning, but turn out to be blessings in disguise. May goes on, he says, in 95, he was diagnosed with cancer, which I thought was a very bad thing. But the experience brought me closer to God and to my loved ones more than I had ever been, and that was wonderfully good. The chemotherapy felt horrible, but it resulted in a complete cure, which I thought was good. But then I later found out that this treatment probably caused the heart disease, which I'm now waiting for a heart transplant. And he passed away in 2005. And so May says, at some point, I gave up trying to decide what's ultimately good or bad. I truly do not know. And so I feel that way about our story today out of Genesis, the story of Hagar and her son Ishmael. It's like a modern day soap opera. If you ever watch soap operas, they're crazy. People die and they come back 5 years later, or somebody gives birth to a child and then they forget it. Excuse me, women. How many women have ever forgotten giving birth to a child? I'm like, how can you forget this? But it's like a modern day soap opera because it's a horrible story. And there's a story of abuse and misuse of power. And we're like, how can anything good, how can you even say there's anything good out of this? But I have to tell you, one of the core things that I know and I believe is that the Bible is a unified story, meaning from Genesis to the end. It's a story that points us and teaches us about God. They're different narratives. They're not how-tos always, but it's this beautiful wisdom in history and story that points us to God. which draws us closer to greater faith, hope, and love to God. So let's see how this story might do that. So if my little helpers with the good and bad, they might want to put up their signs. So we're going to go through a really quick history. God calls Abraham to leave his family. That kind of feels bad to me. I'm like, ew. Then God promises Abram to be the father of a great nation. Well, that's good. God says all the people are going to be blessed through you, Abraham. I'm like, that's great. There's a famine in the land. That's bad. They go to Egypt for food. Well, that's good. His wife, Sarai, cannot get pregnant. And we're like, well, that's bad. If I'm going to be a father of a nation, I need some offspring. So that's bad that she can't get pregnant. Sarah gives her Egyptian slave girl, Hagar, to sleep with her husband and perhaps build a family through her. And I'm just like, good, bad, I don't know. That's weird. I'm like, yeah, we're not doing that in our culture. Now we look at Hagar, a slave girl, which I'm thinking, that's bad. I wouldn't want to be a slave. Hagar gets pregnant. I think that's good. But Sarah is jealous and makes her life miserable. That's bad. Hagar runs away. Good, bad? Uh-huh. And when Hagar runs away, she encounters God and receives a promise. And God says to her, I will increase your descendants. You are pregnant, and I will increase your descendants. Too many to count. And I'm like, wow, that seems really good. That sounds a lot like the promise he made Abraham and Sarah. But God says he will live in hostility towards his brothers. That seems bad. When Hagar has this encounter with God at this time, she is the first one to name God. And she names him, you are the God who sees me. Wow. You are the God who sees me. There was a connection. Hagar was seen in her pain, in her hard situation, in this abusive situation. She is like, God sees me. Hagar returns to Sarah. Good, bad, I'm not sure. Abraham has this son with Hagar, names him Ishmael. I'm like, good. In chapter 17, they're circumcised, Abraham and Ishmael, and I put good, bad. I'm like, yeah, I'm not a guy, but I'm not sure. There's goodness in there, and yet there's hardness in there as well. So Sarah gets pregnant, which is good. And after she has her baby, which we hear in Genesis 21, after Sarah had Isaac, and when Isaac was weaned, she turns to Abraham and says, I don't like how that kid is playing with Isaac. He's not going to inherit. Get rid of them. Can you imagine? There's some tension in that family. And so Abraham hears from God and sends Hagar and Ishmael away. But once again, Hagar has an encounter with the God who sees me. She's not out there alone, even though she feels alone. She's had an encounter with the God who sees me. We don't know the details of that. We do read that she was pretty desperate, that she put the child off to the side. I can't watch my child die. and God intervenes. What we end up with, this story, this soap opera, is that we see that Sarah ends up past dying and Abraham takes on another wife. And many scholars feel that it's Hagar that comes back into his life. And when then Abraham goes to the ancestors, his sons, both Isaac and Ishmael, are there. Abraham, somehow, some grace has happened in his family. There is reconciliation at some point, and there is grace. And I give a lot of credit to Abraham as a parent because he hasn't always been great. But there is something very, very powerful for your family to gather and for the two sons to bury their dad. And the Bible doesn't give us all the details of this, which is, I think, a grace. Because sometimes we think the Bible is going to tell us right exactly what we're doing. And sometimes the Bible is much more about the grace, the unseen of what God is going to do in these places we don't understand. And so throughout life, we find ourselves in situations. Sometimes these situations are of our own making. Choices we've made, decisions we've made. And sometimes these decisions or situations are on other people who have made decisions for us and now impact us. So one time the situation was Hagar ran away, and then the last time Hagar was sent away, not having a lot of control over what happened to her. But I think that when we know that God sees us, we are seen by God. You are the God that sees me. I want to ask you, how do you feel when you hear those words? God sees me? Some people might say, ew, I don't want that. How does it feel to be seen? In a world where so often we do not feel seen or connected, what a beautiful name for God, the God who sees me, the one who sees me. As parents, you see those kids all the time. Man, where are they? I don't hear them. Where'd they go? You know, you are keeping track of kids. They are seen. And they're seen because they're loved and cared for. That's how God watches and sees you. That's how God sees you. Rabbi Kushner, he's the author of this old book called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? He says God's role in human suffering is to stand with us, giving us courage and strength and empowering us to respond with compassion and forgiveness. There's something about suffering, and there is not a person in this room that has not suffered. You may not call it suffering. You may downplay it, but there is not a person in this room. Maybe the little one over here. She thinks she suffers when she doesn't get what she wants yet. But there's not a person here who has not suffered. But our suffering can reveal an even deeper divine activity. You are seen. There's a continuous graciousness, a loving, protective guidance that God is always working on your behalf. And through all experiences, the good and the bad, the good and the bad. And so we look at the long game. My son's a golfer, and I've learned the long game is 4 days of golf, and, it's not what happens in the first round. It's a long game. What's going to happen? And even looking at our own lives, where we look at Abraham's life, at the long game, many, many poor choices on Abraham's part that have hurt numerous people, and yet there is a grace and a goodness because he loved God, and God kept working. Where do you long to see God's grace in your life? What if your story is not over yet? And I want you to know, I don't count age as a factor. You're like, I'm too old, it can't happen. My mom, 99 and 9 months old, following Jesus. How am I going to? I want to do a Bible study in my community, Lori. I want to do something so these people that don't go to church can come. So age is not a factor. God is still working in your life. What if there's another chapter to be written? What if there is healing and reconciliation that God is calling you to? And so I ask, how is God's Spirit still working in your life? How is God's Spirit still working in your life? In the good, in the bad. I can't tell you if it's good or bad. I'm just trusting that God is in this. Julian of Norwich, and this was not a flippant remark. She says, all shall be well. All shall be well. And she was living during the time of the bubonic Black Plague. So today I ask you, I pray for you and say, may you trust your heart and let God's Spirit guide you on this journey. Amen.
That's this week's episode of Peace Lutheran Sermons podcast. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.